U.S. foreign policy has increasingly oscillated between military threats and diplomatic efforts, reflecting a complex strategy aimed at navigating global challenges. This approach often implies military deterrence, particularly in response to crises like the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine and the war in Gaza, and its support to Israel despite the sheer amount of violations committed by Tel Aviv over the course of the past 15 months. The reliance on hard power and military threats raises critical questions about their effectiveness compared to diplomatic solutions and their implications for international relations. As we navigate these challenges, understanding the evolution of U.S. policy in crisis management becomes essential for anticipating future trends. Welcome to In Depth.
Donald Trump is his name, and he's there to stay.
As unlikely, impossible is now reality.
We will make America powerful. We will win, win, win. And we will make America great again. Let's do it our own terms. We will very quickly make America great again.
Under Donald Trump's presidency, U.S. foreign policy shifted dramatically with a focus on correction rather than cooperation. According to The Conversation, Trump views American allies as burdens and competitors, demanding they contribute more to defense spending and buy more American goods. His sharp tactics, such as threatening tariffs and even military actions, have shaken traditional alliances, especially in Europe, where many no longer see the U.S. as a reliable partner. This shift has raised concerns globally, with some countries contemplating closer ties with Russia or China. As the U.S. becomes a more unpredictable force, allies are forced to consider strengthening their own defense capabilities to secure their interests. Israel is seeking to maintain control of five strategic locations in southern Lebanon, citing security needs after its conflict with Hezbollah. The Wall Street Journal stated that the move complicates the ceasefire agreement with Lebanon, rejecting Israel's demands. The Trump administration faces a diplomatic challenge as Israel has already delayed its withdrawal from Lebanon. Tensions are rising, particularly in southern Lebanon, where residents oppose any continued Israeli presence. The situation is further complicated by a shifting political landscape in Lebanon, where the government is reluctant to accept Israel's extended occupation. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has warned Europe allies that America's military presence on the continent may not be permanent, urging them to invest in their own defense capabilities. According to Politico, during his visit to Poland, Hegseth emphasized that future U.S. troop levels will depend on global security needs and Europe's ability to step up. Poland, a key NATO ally, has been a stronger partner, investing heavily in defense and hosting U.S. troops. Hegseth praised Poland as a model ally for its military spending and infrastructure support for U.S. forces. Both nations pledged to strengthen defense cooperation, with Poland becoming a hub for U.S. military equipment along NATO's eastern borders.
Under President Donald Trump, U.S. foreign policy has leaned towards unpredictable numerous multinational commitments and a preference for unilateral action. Washington has hinted at potential military action against Russia if peace negotiations regarding Ukraine fail. This reflects a willingness to use the threat of force to achieve foreign policy objectives. In the Middle East, Washington awaits an Arab plan regarding Gaza, while Trump insists on freeing the hostages or hell. This reflects a pattern of setting firm demands and using strong rhetoric to achieve U.S. objectives. The Trump administration showed little patience for traditional diplomacy, preferring to demonstrate power. Trump pursued a hawkish stance against adversaries like China, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, and Venezuela through economic sanctions. Despite these tough measures, he engaged in diplomatic efforts with North Korea to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. Trump's foreign policy has been characterized by a transactional view of international relations, which has strained relationships with allies. Some view the US as a destabilizing force. This approach involves questioning long-standing alliances and employing tariffs, leading allies to reconsider cooperation with the US. While some argue that Trump's sharp stance can deter adversaries and create opportunities for dialogue, others are skeptical. Critics suggest that this approach isolates the US and undermines its credibility. Future policies may continue this trend of balancing threats with diplomacy in complex geopolitical scenarios, such as managing the Ukraine-Russia conflict and addressing Middle East peace initiatives.
Well, welcome back, and for more analysis, we're joined by Mr. Mohammed Osman, an international relations specialist from Cairo, and Ms. Ginger Chapman, a Republic Party member from Washington, to discuss how U.S. foreign policy balanced military deterrence and diplomacy, viewing traditional allies as burdens, prioritizing national interests, and using threats and tariffs, which has reduced trust in U.S. leadership in many parts of the world. And welcome to Qnews. Let me start here with Mr. Osman. And Mr. Osman, how does the U.S. inclination to applying hot power in many foreign policy situations impact balance between diplomacy and conflict resolution, particularly in the Middle East?
Thank you, Mona, for having me. Greetings to you and to your guest. Of course, the United States or the Trump administration's record in applying their own approach to foreign policy in the Middle East, utilizing way more hard power than soft power as of late, has had mixed results. Initially, it did yield some results when the United States exerted a concerted amount of effort on Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu in order to agree to a ceasefire. However, later on, this very forceful approach of the United States moved onto the Palestinian side and the Arab side, trying to impose a displacement scheme that, of course, has garnered the complete opposition and rejection of Egypt, Jordan, and the majority of the Arab world, and also even the majority of the international community. Not only the global South and the Arab world are opposed to this plan. However, so far the ceasefire that the Trump administration was instrumental in brokering, along, of course, with the Qatari and Egyptian mediators, has yielded a tangible result we can see, and that is the temporary cessation of hostility exchange of detainees. However, moving forward from this point, I think this is where the main problem comes in, and where the U.S. propositions, the outlandish U.S. propositions, come in to complicate matters further. Because instead of focusing on reconstructing Gaza and engaging in an actual process to impose a sustained cessation of hostilities, the idea of ethnic cleansing is being introduced as a humane alternative. Of course, this is unacceptable, and this will be a recipe for disaster and chaos and pandemonium in the Middle East if it is pursued by the Trump administration. So the forceful approach that relies so heavily on hard power in the Middle East by the Trump administration needs to be revisited if the Trump administration is interested in the long-term stability of the Middle East.
Ms. Chapman, how has Donald Trump's approach to foreign policy diverged from traditional U.S. strategies and policies regarding its allies?
Yes, well, thank you, Mara. And that is an excellent question. As we have seen, and as you mentioned, Trump has become very transactional. Trump is saying this is a different America. We have a different vision of America's role in the world. And as a result of that, and because of circumstances, Trump is fighting on many different fronts, both at home and abroad. So his tactic has been to become very aggressive. He's aggressively approaching all of these different conflicts. In particular, what we've seen several days ago, everyone was expecting the worst. They were expecting Israel to break the ceasefire and hostilities to resume. Trump threw out this crazy plan that was not a plan. He said the United States was going to own Gaza, take over Gaza, and buy Gaza from Israel. Of course, this isn't a plan. There's no way to carry this out or execute it. And it's legally unclear. Israel has no authority to sell the land. However, what we've seen since then is that Trump saying he's going to take over Gaza has resulted in other parties stepping forward to take action. We've seen Egypt rally the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to come up with and set forth a plan to finance the rebuilding of Gaza and to keep the Palestinians there. And essentially, Trump is transactional. He wants results. He does not want to be known as a warmonger. He wants to create peace and economic stability. So if a plan is set forth by Egypt, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, that sets forth a solution, Trump is likely to say, yes, this is a good deal. This is a deal that everyone can live with, so that the 70, 80 years of occupation and fighting can finally end and the parties can move on to the next stage of negotiating peace, whatever that may be. And once again, we're seeing Trump take bold action to resolve situations. Sometimes this angers the parties that need the resolution. However, at least we are seeing the ball move forward. We're seeing this in Ukraine. Hopefully, we will see this in the Middle East as well.
Right, let me take it to Ms. Osman here and turning to another area, but also within the U.S. Foreign policy. And what are the long-term implications of Trump's administration's unilateral approach to the settlement of the Ukraine conflict for the U.S. foreign policy?
Well, on the one hand, on the positive side, it will end one of the worst and bloodiest wars on the European continent and maybe even the world since World War II. It has been estimated that hundreds of thousands of people have died over the course of the Ukraine war, and more importantly, the war in Ukraine has threatened global stability and was actually kept the prospect of a third world war or a nuclear Armageddon hanging over our heads constantly because of the unprecedented escalation and tension between the U.S.-led alliance, NATO, and Ukraine, and Russia. And it's been unprecedented since the Cuban Missile Crisis. So moving to end this war in general and trying to find something that would ensure some sort of sustained and durable peace, yes, that's a positive sign. However, we did not see any hard power in this regard, because if anything, and that will get me to the negative side of this for the Europeans and the NATO allies in particular, not for me, but for them, that is giving in to Russia, because what Trump is doing is he's basically granting Russia most of its demands, whether these demands are legitimate.
Excluding Ukraine and
Yeah,
speaking with Europe on some of the issue, not the whole issue. What does this mean?
Yes, it means what I was just about to say, Mona. It means that the U.S. is pursuing a unilateral settlement with of the Ukrainian conflict. Apparently, Ukraine is being completely sidelined from the negotiating process, at least on the core issues. It seems that the Russians and the Americans have worked something out behind the scenes already, even before Trump's inauguration, and communication between President Putin and President Trump, President-elect Trump back then, were there before even Trump was inaugurated to assume the responsibilities of his second term. So it seems that there is a settlement, and it seems that this settlement will not take the security concerns of Europe into account, at least to the extent that the Europeans would like it to be taken. And also, the Ukrainians are not part of the conversation. Of course, we have to admit that the Ukrainians have rather unrealistic demands that do not correspond to the realities on the battlefield. And we cannot deny that the part of the responsibility of why the situation has deteriorated to the open state of war was the style of leadership and the choices of the Ukrainian leadership back in 2022. However, now as things are, it seems that they are being almost completely excluded from the negotiating process, and this is not right. This will not ensure that peace will be sustained. And also, at the same time, on the other hand, Vice President J.D. Vance threatened Russia that the U.S. might send troops into Ukraine if the peace fails. Of course, they will never do this, because this will mean a third world war. And it also showed us or revealed a sort of inconsistency, because right afterwards, a few hours afterwards, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, came out and said, no, we're not sending any troops to Ukraine under any circumstances, and no, Ukraine will never be a member of NATO. Mm-hmm. So it seems that this inconsistency of the United States in dealing with this matter and trying just to seal off the issue and resolve it at the expense of the Ukrainians and the Europeans, and this is definitely shed in this conflict.
Indeed. Ms. Chapman, in what ways does Trump view U.S. allies as competitors? And will this jeopardize Washington's ability to maintain its historical network of allies in Europe and the Western Hemisphere?
Yes. Well, Trump's recent stand presenting other countries as our competitors, Trump is very worried about the economic security of the United States, and the United States is $36 trillion in debt. We're hemorrhaging money. This is unsustainable. So Trump is trying to stanch the bleeding and allow the United States to compete on equal footing with the rest of the world, because at this point, Trump seems to believe that we subsidize most of our trading neighbors' economies. I would like to comment on what my colleague said as far as Trump giving into Putin's demands. Some people perceive this as Trump finally recognizing Russia's legitimate security concerns. Trump is not cutting Europe out of the negotiation. In fact, Trump is saying America needs to detach. This is Europe's problem. Europe is Russia's neighbor, and Europe needs to learn to live with and get along with Russia and recognize Russia's legitimate security concerns. Russia does not want fully armed, NATO occupied, armed Ukraine right on their border. And as far as Trump shutting Ukraine out of the negotiations, it has long been an open secret that Ukraine has never really held any power in this situation. Everything Zelensky does has been dictated by Washington. And unfortunately, the Obama administration and the Biden administration used the country of Ukraine as a vast money laundering operation and has attempted to extract the wealth from Ukraine. For example, at the beginning of the conflict, Zelensky signed over the rights to the farmland of Ukraine to large corporations such as Monsanto and Cargill. So right now, Ukraine is a victim of American hegemony. Ukraine has suffered. Ukraine has never had a chance to win this war. Russia has always been a more powerful military opponent. And now is the time to extricate and cease the hostilities before Ukraine loses any more land and any more of their resources. And Trump has made the bold statement that if we continue to send billions of dollars to Ukraine, then Trump is going to want rare earth mineral rights in exchange, because once again, the conflict in Ukraine is draining Americans' treasure and our money, and Americans can no longer sustain this kind of spending. So we're seeing Trump take bold moves to end the conflict in Ukraine in a way that is acceptable to Russia to prevent hostilities years down the road, and also to end the conflict in the Middle East so that the entire world can go on to focus on attaining economic stability, peaceful, fair trade, and essentially national sovereignty rather than this global oppression that we're finding of all of the countries. So Trump is trying to cease the hostilities in Ukraine. These are bold moves, but they are pushing the ball forward. Europe has to step up and take responsibility for their own relation with Ukraine. And also, when Trump put Britain in charge of rallying the defense of Ukraine, this was not a favor to Britain. He put Britain in charge as a way to pay them back for MI6 attacking Trump during his first term. MI6 was part of the CIA attack on Trump. So now Trump has put Britain in charge of rallying Europe to defend Ukraine, and it is time for Europe to step up and make peace with Russia.
Right, Mr. Osman, how does the U.S. unequivocal support for Israel affect its credibility and influence in the broader Middle East?
Well, before I answer your question, Mona, I want to comment on what Ms. Chapman said. And I don't think we are in disagreement, because I said Trump is giving in to Russia's demands. She said if he isn't, and what she described now is just exactly that, Trump giving in to Russia's demands. And I do not necessarily disagree with that. What you just said, that Trump is throwing Ukraine and Europe under the bus, under the Russian bus, a Russian T-72, actually, not a bus. And I don't mind that. It's music to my ears as an observer and as someone who is very interested in the multipolar world, and someone who is supportive of entities such as the BRICS nation that Trump has threatened. with 100% tariffs, I don't mind that. I don't mind the United States basically deconstructing the entire security structure of Europe and the Western world. I don't mind that. It's in our interest as the global South. But let's call a spade a spade. When Trump gives in to Russia's demands, this is what he's exactly doing. Russia is not giving a single concession on that account, and I don't mind that. I don't mind that at all. But I don't think you mind that either. Maybe that's in the vested interest of the United States, or your definition, or many Americans' definition, or Donald Trump's definition of the U.S. national interest. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. We are in agreement, Mrs. Chapman. We do not necessarily disagree on that. We just disagree on the naming, on the terming of what things are. And pertaining to your question regarding the Middle East and how Trump is doing it, of course, what Trump is doing in Ukraine and Europe cannot in the Middle East, because it's very different in the Middle East. What's happening in the Middle East could cause a huge crisis. The way Trump has been treating U.S. allies in the Middle East, namely Egypt and Jordan, is unacceptable. Him trying to impose such a fantasy, Alice in Wonderland type of solution on the people in the Middle East and on the Palestinians is unacceptable. Ethnic cleansing is not an option. Interested in actually pushing for an end to the sustainable peace in the Middle East, and by peace I mean the very deep-rooted, long-lasting peace process between Egypt and Israel, for example. Then he can push for the displacement scheme, for example. I think now that there is an agreement that has been made, Mrs. Chapman made a very good comment saying that now the Arabs and Egypt are proposing something. They were actually proposing something way before these empty threats, yes, by the way. And the Egyptian plan was there before, way before. And it was discussed with the Biden administration way before the Trump administration was even in the picture. So no, it did not prompt anyone. However, Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, saying that now the U.S. administration is ready to listen is something good.
Briefly, Mr. Osman. Briefly, because we're running out of time.
Yes, but no, just to conclude, it is something positive. I think that what the U.S. administration is proposing right now, what Rubio has said, that he will listen to the Arab initiatives and that they have an open mind, that's a good sign. There are alternatives. Let's talk. We are partners with the United States. We have a very good relationship. And the Trump administration and the administration, for example, of the Egyptian government of President Sisi during the Trump's previous term had a very cordial relationship. Let's resume that.
Yes.
Let's not ruin that.
Yes. Ms. Chapman, I wanted really to give you a chance to respond to what Dr. Osman here said, but unfortunately my time is out. We'll make it again. Let me here thank you both, Mr. Mohammed Osman, an international relations specialist, and Ms. Ginger Chapman, a Republican Party member. We thank you both for your valuable insights. And I guess that brings us to the end of today's episode of In Depth. Many thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.